Welcome to New York's #2 sports show. The Rangers lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins by a final score of 6-5. And don't let that score mislead you. This was not a close game from the outset, and the Rangers were somehow able to cut it to a one goal deficit very late. But kind of the perfect scenario when you think about it. Rangers lose in regulation, but you do get some stat padding as well for some players that could certainly be traded, either in the near future or a little bit beyond, with Vincent Trocheck and Alexis Lafrenière both recording 3 points each. But just another game where the Rangers get off to a slow start and aren't really able to recover. Penguins score 2 goals, just about the first 6 minutes of the game. Rangers almost didn't have a shot on goal for the entire second period. It spanned over 20 minutes if you backtrack it to, I think, about 3 minutes to go in the first. And then finally, the Rangers broke the shutout with 1.5 minutes left in the second period on Alexis Lafrenière 4-on-3 power play goal, which was their first shot of the period. So, Pittsburgh pretty much controlled this entire game. And, look, at this point, with the Rangers roster the way it is, with an already well below average team, it's going to be hard for them to win games. You know, After the Olympic break, when Shesterkin and Fox inevitably return, they're still going to lose a lot of games, but, it might be a little bit different. But yeah, I think at this point, those guys might be healthy, but there's no reason at all to be playing them right now, especially with the break coming up. So this was a game actually where the Penguins honored their 2016 Cup team, where Mike Sullivan was the head coach. And it's just, pretty drastic, just the difference in direction of these teams, where Dan Muse, the first-year coach of the Penguins, who was the assistant coach with the Rangers in, Peter Laviolette's 2 seasons with the Blue Shirts in 2024, the President's Trophy year, then last season, which we know how that ended, missing the playoffs. But Muse has really turned things around in Pittsburgh. And Mike Sullivan, and it's not his fault, but Mike Sullivan has not done that with the Rangers. And, so it's got to be a tough, sort of reality check for Sullivan, but, at the same time, gets to celebrate some good memories in Pittsburgh. But yeah, really, with no Panarin in the lineup, and with him, it's status quo. Still no news yet as far as Artemi Panarin. My hunch is still that Panarin will be dealt by the Wednesday 3 o'clock Olympic freeze deadline. Now, could it go beyond that? It's possible. I mean, the actual trade deadline isn't until March 6th. But I do think that this was intended for basically it to be a Panarin deadline, and for him to kind of know where he's going, get settled in during the Olympic break, and then be ready to go coming out of it. But again, we still don't know exactly what it is, but we'll be sure to talk about it once we know more. I had discussed briefly in a short that I had recorded about Vincent Iorio being claimed off waivers from the San Jose Sharks, a defenseman. And look, he was waived earlier this season by Washington. So this is not like, this is any star player coming to town, but we'll see. He's young, got the physical traits when you look at it, right side defenseman. Those are, highly coveted. And so, whether Braden Schneider is traded or not, expect to see Iorio find his way into the lineup. But I mean, with him being a right shot defenseman, I guess it could be someone can, it'll be interesting, I guess, because there are spots to be had. Taking Connor Mackey out of the equation, and at this point, I would think that Mackey is ticketed for Hartford again. And so at that point, Vakanainen could be the healthy scratch. I mean, Scott Morrow has been playing well, but in the way of playing younger players, not that Vakanainen's old, but he's a little bit older than, Morrow and Iorio, but they're also both right shot defensemen. I'm curious to see, what they do with that. Again, it's not going to make much of a difference. And the other thing to remember is that Adam Fox will eventually be back. So I think that there was a plan in place here with Iorio for sure. I think that with the Rangers being a team that is not going to make the playoffs and a team that is really more in evaluation mode, relatively decent chance, I guess, we see Iorio in the final game against Carolina before the break, but we'll see. And yeah, he, funny enough, had one playoff game in his career against the Rangers, and it was a hit by Alexis Lafrenière that actually caused him to leave that game, and subsequently he never returned in that series. Now, the only reason why he was in the lineup was the Capital blue line was completely decimated. That was where like Dylan McIlrath, who really is a career AHL player, he was getting like fairly regular minutes in that series. Washington was in a pretty tough way, and so Iorio did get a look in game one, but he was a second round pick not that long ago. I think it was 2021. Um, so we'll see. So just kind of wanted to catch up on that. Brett Berard was sent down, and that was kind of in conjunction with the Iorio move. They would have been someone had to go, and obviously it wasn't going to be. Panarin's still on the roster, technically as a scratch. Like the three scratches of this game were Iorio, Panarin, and Mackey, and I guess they felt like between Mackey and Berard that I guess in an emergency situation that Mackey would be, as a defenseman, I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily an indictment on Berard, but it's also it shows where he is. And it's not in a great place, but I think that he's another player, even though he hasn't been all that impressive this season, players like him, Othman, Perreault, even though Perreault is kind of at a different level, and Perreault is kind of here out of necessity. A lot of them kind of are in different ways, but I would be looking to just seeing how young players do, right? Scott Morrow was honestly flat out bad in this game, but it's still worth it to see what you have. And who knows, um, who knows as far as trades that may come about? You never know. I mean, and they wouldn't be mean parts of deals, but if Brennan Othman, can play halfway decent, then maybe he could be thrown into a trade, right? I definitely could see that happening. So Jonathan Quick got the start as far as goalies are concerned. And, I wasn't sure who was going to get the go. I mean, because it really had been kind of 50-50. And presumably, with one more game, Quick probably gets the nod against Carolina, but there hasn't been much of a difference in terms of effectiveness between Quick and Martin. Now, Quick obviously has the resume and the career and, was really good as a backup with the Rangers before he was basically thrust into starter duties with Shesterkin being out. But it has been tough for Jonathan Quick. But he does get the start against the Penguins here. And for Pittsburgh, it was Stuart Skinner, who was acquired from the Oilers in a trade with Tristan Jarry. Pretty big goalie trade. You don't really see that too often. And not that those two are, top flight goalies by any means, but, Stuart Skinner, he did make it to the Cup final, even though, there was a lot of help involved there. But Skinner has done well with the Penguins. Wasn't so great in this game, to be honest. I mean, he allowed 5 goals on 20 shots. Wasn't really tested at points, but yeah, he wasn't great, but it didn't matter. But for the Penguins, they were missing players as well. Brian Rust was suspended and not playing. Chris Letang, he's out 4 weeks. So obviously, look, there's still Crosby, there's still Malkin, Erik Karlsson, just to name a few. But, they weren't at full strength here. But let's jump into it. And as far as the lines were concerned, it's kind of what you'd expect, right? Defensive pairs were the same as they were last game, and Johnny Brodzinski comes back into the lineup for Berard and goes in on the 4th line. Now, I'll jump ahead here. Noah Laba gets hurt in the first period. I think he might have re-aggravated that shoulder injury that kept him out for a little bit, where he missed the Winter Classic, where he was out kind of late December into the middle of January. I just, again, kind of a guess on my part, but it felt like that might have been the case. And, he left in the first period. I think he tried to give it a go. He was back out there at the very least on the bench in the second period. And I can't remember if he got a shift. Either way, it was limited at that because, you look at the stat line here, 4 shifts in 2 minutes and 34 seconds. So Noah Laba, clearly was in pain. And that's tough because he's another one of those players that you want to, give an opportunity to, has been somewhat of a bright spot. He hasn't lit the world on fire by any means, but I think that there's a role for him. You can see, even if it ends up being like a fourth line center, like I think that with him, he's got speed, some, a solid defensive awareness for a young player like that. Just doesn't really have much of the offensive skill. I would be stunned. He's never going to be a top six player, and at best, he's a third line center. So yeah, he ends up being out, and so that ends up kind of juggling lines a bit in the way of the bottom. Really, the top six I don't think was really affected much at all, but the bottom six was. And yeah, I'm trying to see if any other time on ice kind of stands out. Not really. I guess Sam Carrick ends up like playing a lot more than maybe he normally would at 14 minutes and 34 seconds. Now I know he kills penalties, but still that's a lot more than normal for him. But yeah, Rangers actually, I'd say, not that they played well, like the first couple of minutes, and it's almost pointless saying this, like Penguins were icing the puck a lot. And all it was really the first Penguin opportunity, which wasn't like deep into the game. It was early, 2:37 in. Anthony Mantha scores his 18th goal of the season from Rucker McGroarty. And this was one where it ends up being turned over. Scott Morrow tries to get it in the direction of Matt Rempe, and it goes right to the stick of McGroarty, and Mantha tips it in front. And so I think a little bit of blame goes to Quick there, but I can't give it fully because it does go off of Mantha, but it trickles through Quick. And again, Scott Morrow and Matt Rempe fuck up on this one where, it's just a terrible turnover. And Morrow had a bad game. Rempe had a bad game. Matt Rempe has not been very good. And hopefully it's related to the thumb. Because if not, like he was really showing some strides, like even early in the season, like that, Edstrom ended up struggling before he got hurt, but there was a point in time in last year as well where that Edstrom Carrick Rempe line was very effective. And Matt Rempe seemed like, his skating was getting better. It seemed like he was becoming more than just a guy that fights. But man, he has been terrible since he's come back. And then at 6:05, the Penguins would score again. And it would be Nola Chari scoring his 5th goal of the season from Lizotte and Dewar. And yet again, it would be the fourth line that was on for this one. And I believe that Rempe was the one who originally did not get the puck out of the zone, which I think resulted in them maybe missing. I think he might have lost a little bit of ice time after this. It was short-lived. And, no sense in stapling him to the bench. Like, I'm not like Rempe's another guy that you want to evaluate. He's a young player. But he has not been playing well. And yeah, those turnovers lead to goals against. This one wasn't Quick's fault. And basically what happens is Dewar gets the puck at the point, finds Lizotte, cross ice to Achari, one-timer and in, 2-0 Penguins. 5 seconds later, it's a penalty on McGroarty, tripping Alexis Lafrenière at 6:10. Ranger power play does not score there. And from there, Rangers, look, it wasn't a very good first period for them. Things settled down, I guess I would say. I mean, the rest of the first period, Penguins outshoot the Rangers 11-9. So nothing to write home about, but, they kind of kept this from becoming, a Bruins 10-2 game, the Ottawa game, one of these embarrassing games. It didn't quite become that, but it was, very lopsided and got pretty ugly in the second period in some ways. At least in terms of the shot totals. At 17:40 of the first, Scott Morrow hooks McGroarty, and the Penguins do not score on the power play there. Penguins power play has been struggling lately. Eventually, they would get off the schneid, but the score after one would be 2-0 Penguins. We go to the second period, and just, not a whole lot to speak of for the Rangers at all. And the Rangers take some penalties. At 3:19, Matthew Robertson interferes with Justin Brazeau. This was kind of a situation where, Robertson, I don't think Robertson saw Brazeau. And, they reviewed it. It certainly didn't deserve to be a major. It probably could have been nothing at all, but they end up going with a 2-minute minor. Rangers kill it off. And then at 10:56, Johnny Brodzinski high sticks Connor Dewar. And, just not a great penalty by Brodzinski, who has kind of been and look, he's been a healthy scratch. He's kind of been in the doghouse a little bit by Mike Sullivan. And, Sullivan was not thrilled with some of the penalties taken. I don't blame him. And at the end of that power play, after the Penguins had their chances on previous power plays with, I think, maybe, oh, sorry, after the power play had just expired, 3 seconds after, it's Anthony Mantha scoring his 19th goal of the season for Merkel and Malkin at 12:59 of the second, 3-0 Penguins. And, basically, it was a shot by Raquel, great save by Quick, but he's able to get his own rebound, get it in the front of Mantha, and he's able to just sweep it into the open cage to give the Pens that 3-goal lead. Then at 17:09, Carrick and Mantha go off for matching minors. Carrick tripping, Mantha slashing. Carrick did drop the gloves. Mantha would not reciprocate, and they would both go off, so it's 4-on-4. But then the Penguins take a bad too many men on the ice penalty at 18:15 in the second. And at this point, the Rangers had not had a shot on goal. It had been over 20 minutes of game action. The Rangers have a shot on goal, which is really ridiculous. As bad as they've been this year, that's another one to remember. But they had the 4-on-3, and the first shot that Stuart Skinner saw in a long time is a goal. And it's not a great goal by Skinner. It squeaks through him. It's a goal by Alexis Lafrenière, his 11th goal of the season from Miller and Zibanejad. Simply put, Trocheck wins the faceoff on the 4-on-3. Lafrenière is just kind of standing in the right circle, waiting, and he is able to score past Skinner to make it 3-1. But at the end of the second period, not a good penalty by Will Cooley. At the 20-minute mark, he holds Parker Wotherspoon. And, I've been saying this from the beginning of the season. Will Cooley has just been taking bad penalties basically all year long. I mean, sure, there's ebbs and flows, but, he is one of the more aggressive players of the Rangers, although even that, like I say, take it with a little grain of salt, because I even think that has been dimmed a bit this year. But what I do know is, again, too many penalties for Cooley. I've said the same thing about Trocheck as well, just off the top of my head. But that ends up being a pretty big penalty, because out of the third period, a minute and 20 in, Rickard Rakell scores on the power play. 10th goal of the season from Crosby and Carlson. So this was one where, Rakell is able to score, right and tight. Will Borgen was in the vicinity, but, to no avail. And the Pens take a 4-1 lead. And then only 20 seconds later, Noel Acciari scores his second goal of the game. 6th goal of the season from Lizotte and Kulak. And this was one where it was the Zibanejad line with Vakanainen and Morrow. Vakanainen gets beat by, I believe I think it might have been Kulak, possibly. Who was it? Maybe Lizotte. Either way, Acciari is able to score where Perreault is there defending him, but Acciari beats him and scores. These weren't horrible goals by Quick. On the Rakell power play goal, I kind of wish that Quick was maybe able to cover it or at least locate it. And he was kind of just scrambling around, didn't know where it was, and they scored. So, some of these goals, look, like the Soucy goal the other night, looked bad. There's been goals that look bad on Quick, and there's other ones that don't look bad, but if you really, really dissect it, are ones that probably could be avoided. Like the goal itself isn't bad, but what leads up to it isn't great. And so that makes it 5-1 Penguins. Third period at 4:37, Matt Rempe is cross-checked, leading to a Ranger power play. They don't score on it. At 8:24, Will Borgen is called for roughing Igor Shinnikov on a play where Shinnikov hits him into the boards. Borgen's helmet, basically flies off, and Borgen was pretty upset. Hits Shinnikov, they call the penalty on him, and the Rangers actually score shorthanded. So the Rangers get on a bit of a run, surprisingly here. At 9:12, Trocheck, back in his hometown, scores his 12th goal of the season, assisted by Gavrikov. A nice goal by Trocheck. Breakaway, and he's the guy that is good in the shootout, and he scores, basically roofs it under the crossbar and in to make it 5-2. Then Vlad Gavrikov scores his 9th goal of the season from Schneider and Brodzinski at 15-15. Nice shot by Gavrikov. He's really impressed me in terms of his offensive ability. And that shot, sadly, I would say more than half, if not more, of the forwards weren't even capable of doing that. This plays that Gavrikov has made this year, where I say to myself, like, I don't know that 75% of the forwards could make. And I don't know what that says, if it's more praise to Gavrikov or just, more of a problem as far as the skill up front. But it was a nice goal, makes it 5-3. But then the Penguins, shortly thereafter, at 17:28, get an empty net goal. Ben Kindle scores his 12th goal of the season from Dewar and Skinner. And with Kindle, the interesting thing with him is he was actually, in essence, the draft pick that was acquired via the JT Miller trade, where Miller, Vancouver gets the pick. They trade it to Pittsburgh for Marcus Pettersson. And eventually it ends up in a Ben Kindle selection. Penguins might have even made a trade, a slight trade up or trade down in the first round. But again, in essence, it ends up being Kindle. Now, look, A, the Rangers might not have selected him. B, if he was selected by the Rangers, sure as hell, he would not have been producing to this level in year one, if ever. But again, it just shows you that, Rangers can't be trading away assets like that. And philosophically, trading for JT Miller was not the right thing to do. But anyway, empty net goal for Kindle makes it 6-3 Penguins. And then the Rangers, a minute and a half later, so at 18:53, score on an Alexis Lafrenière goal. Second goal of the game, 12th of the season from Trocheck and Robertson. So at this point, because it's back to a 2-goal game. A nice pass by Trocheck from the corner, nice shot by Lafrenière, and it makes it 6-4. And then at 19:49, so with 11 seconds left, Will Cooley scores his 13th goal of the season from Trocheck and Lafrenière. So again, Trocheck and Lafrenière, basically towards the end of the game, just kind of racking up points. It's a bit misleading, but the stat line looks good, which again, for those two players who, may or may not get traded, you don't mind, if they're going to be the ones that do it, it's not so bad. But yeah, JT Miller sort of easily gets in the Penguin zone. They kind of let him in. Lafrenière takes a shot from the point, deflected by Trocheck, and Cooley buries the loose change. There would actually be a face-off in the Penguin zone with less than 5 seconds left, but nothing comes of it. The Penguins hang on for the 6-5 win. Rangers, I don't even know what stats to kind of get into with the Rangers. There's just so many bad ones as far as how they've been. The Rangers, let's see. Yeah, they've lost 3 in a row, 6 of their last 7, 11 of the last 13, which is 2-10-1. I mean, look, as soon as Fox and Shesterkin went down, not that they were doing that well before that, but once that happened, everyone knew it was over, and it was over. So, we'll see what's up with Noah Laba. Hopefully, it's not too bad, but the timing is good, right, for him, where, obviously the Rangers, they'll have the one game Thursday against the Hurricanes, and then they won't play for, probably 3 or so weeks from there. So, weird on the scheduling, right, where the Rangers have a long sort of break here. It almost feels like the break should be now, but yeah, they don't play until Thursday, which is the last game on the schedule for the NHL, the 5th. The roster freeze actually takes place before the Carolina game. So yeah, we'll find out about Panarin. We'll find out whether or not he gets traded by Wednesday. And so at this point, Rangers 22-28-6. They are, they have a bottom 3 or so record when you look at points percentage. They're very close with St. Louis and other teams as well, right? Calgary's in the mix there, the Blackhawks. So we'll see. But yeah, Rangers, just hope they keep on losing. It's a pretty sad and pathetic product they're putting out there, but that's just the name of the game right now. And, hoping that more trades did not happen. Again, I think Panarin's the only one that you'll probably see here before the Olympic break. And then it gets interesting with the likes of Trocheck, Schneider, Lafrenière to a lesser extent, and seeing kind of what happens by that March 6th or so deadline. So again, final score from Pittsburgh is the Penguins 6 and the Rangers 5. And now the Rangers will take a little bit of time off before their last game before the break, as they will head home to Madison Square Garden to take on the Carolina Hurricanes.